Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest latest installation in the Southwestern District Leadership Training Sessions. Today, we're going to have a class on grant writing with Ashley Brown. Ashley fulfills her passions of nonprofit leadership and equity, inclusion, accessibility and diversity, grant development, and live music at the Barbershop Harmony Society as the Outreach Grant Program Administrator and Inclusion Coordinator. In addition to her professional work, she continues her dedication to service in the community through advocating for collective impact with by volunteering with local organizations like Hands on Nashville and Small World Yoga. With that, please welcome Ashley Brown.
Hello, greetings, Jack and Terry and future audiences and you at home. Thank you for being here. So my name is Ashley Brown. I've been at the Barbershop Harmony Society for 5 years and 2 days. So in 2 days, I'll have been there 5 years. I started in customer service and then I took over the grants program in 2018. And I have a huge passion for grant work. And like Scott said, I have done grant work outside of BHS. So I help write narratives for other organizations to help them get funding in Nashville. And I have read many hundreds of applications of barbershoppers seeking money from us, seeking money for in their own communities. And so I have a really good idea at this point of what makes a good application, especially as it pertains to what barbershoppers are trying to get across. So from my perspective and from my lens, throughout this presentation, we're going to mostly focus on one-time events. I have the most experience reading things about youth events. So I think from that perspective or that lens a lot, because oftentimes that's what people are seeking funding for primarily. It is generally easier to seek funding for a one-time event or a program that has a definitive end or beginning versus getting operational funding support. Although that is available and out there, it's just a little bit more difficult to find those opportunities, and it's really based on relationship building a lot of times. So with that, we'll kind of get started here and I'll share my screen momentarily. I introduced him before, but we have a special guest. His name is Oliver Catsby for those at home. And yeah, if you see a tail in the video, I apologize. Give me just 1 second here. Awesome. So I kind of already talked a little bit about what we're going to focus on throughout the course of this presentation, but now, especially during COVID, this is a really great time to work on some of your boilerplate narratives. So this boilerplate narrative essentially is just you starting to write your application and have certain parts of your application pre-written, so that way you can pull from it at any point in time. So you might write things like your mission or your vision, or plan out some parts of your narrative ahead of time, so that way when you get to an actual application, you're not spending a really long time on some of the sections of the narrative that you could have pre-written ahead of time. Of course, during COVID, a lot of funding priorities have changed for many different funders, and we'll continue to see that. A lot of funding is going to go directly to folks that are providing critical care for communities and vulnerable populations during COVID. So arts funding is a little bit more difficult to get at this point in time. However, I think that will plateau and level off after things return to a little bit of more normalcy. And there's still a really excellent case to be made that you're providing care for the community through COVID, if you can think of certain virtual events or operational expenses that you need to maintain, and you can prove yourself as a kind of community asset during that time. So it might sound very woo-woo, but this is a great time to focus on the invitation of abundance in your chapter or district. So I'm going to go briefly over some basic application parts and narrative concepts here, just so we can all be on the same page with some of these things. So grants, a lot of times you'll hear a lot of these words as buzzwords, and Buzzwords in an application are really great to have if they match, excuse me, if they match what the application is specifically looking for. So if you're reading an application or a funding document that mentions over and over and over again equity or sustainability or collaboration or any of these kind of words that I've put on here, and of course there are others, but you can tell that they're specifically looking for you to write about those topics, right? And you don't want to railroad your program or your event or your narrative in general into, you don't want to be a square peg trying to go in a circle, but you can certainly make sure that you're trying to incorporate some of what they're looking for and craft your narrative accordingly. So DEAI, which is an aspect of my job as the inclusion coordinator, that stands for diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. This is a really important topic, especially as we're talking about communities moving forward. Equity is going to be super important. So are you making sure that there are accessible ways to access your program? And that could be from a socioeconomic standpoint. So are you providing scholarships? This could be, are you taking into account what communities you're serving and how you're serving them? If the primary population you're serving are older people, are you making accommodations for how long you're standing during chorus, or how you're thinking about the populations that you're serving as much as you are also thinking about the audiences that you want to attract? So you want to make sure that this seamlessly flows through your narrative. You don't want to force it, but if you can think of ways that your chapter can be more inclusive of more people and create equity within your programs and events, that's going to make your specific application stand out. Collaboration here is referring to how you're collaborating with other organizations. So not necessarily the collaboration within your chapter and your chapter's board, but how you're incorporating other organizations doing similar things, or if you can think of a really inventive way to incorporate folks who aren't necessarily doing something similar, but you've kind of collaborated on a project or an event that is going to be great and beneficiary to both parties or both organizations. We see oftentimes, mostly this being a collaborative effort between BHS chapters and Harmony Incorporated chapters and SAI chapters, because we're all in similar geographic areas most of the time. So it makes sense to include other folks doing barbershop programming to help with barbershop programs and events, right? And that does make your application a little bit more competitive. And it becomes even more competitive if you can think outside of the barbershop world, which I know as barbershoppers, sometimes it's really hard for us to do. We get very involved and excited about barbershopping, but we forget that there are tons of other musical organizations doing great work in the community. So how can you incorporate what they're doing and create a really awesome event? And that's going to bring new audiences to your event, and you're going to bring new audiences to their event. So there have been some really inventive ways that people have done this. I know Alexandria Harmonizers did a wonderful series of events with some local arts organizations that have a primarily Black and African American audience. And they did a whole arts week, and so they incorporated a lot of the Black spirituals into their music, and they had, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name. They performed at our event 2 years ago. Oh, I can see them in my head. That's okay. I'm just going to pass on that. They flew out some performers that took part in the event as well, and they performed both in the arts community, but they also went and did some community performances. Overall, a great event, and it ended up raising a lot of money. So that was an awesome event, and they incorporated and collaborated with organizations that weren't specific to barbershop. So they were the barbershop element of the actual event, but the whole event was not solely barbershop. So you can think about how you can bring your specific thing and create learning experiences between two different organizations. So we're also the students as much as we are the teachers. And I know sometimes we want to be the teachers and teach everybody barbershop, but we also have to come from a place of learning, and that creates inclusion, that creates collaboration, and it can build really great relationships with other organizations in your community. This is already something that I've talked about a little bit in that story that I was telling, but impact are essentially a collection of outcomes that lead to your long-term impact. So impact in general is a way to say how you are making an indention on your community, how you are being perceived by your community, the long-term lasting effects that your program or your presence in the community creates. So that's what impact means, but there's a lot of ways to talk about impact, and that has its whole own sphere of academia related to measurement and evaluation, which you can get really in depth with, but impact is basically a collection of outcomes. Diversified funding, this is essentially saying that you don't want to be solely reliant on one revenue in order to maintain your chapter's operational expenses or the program or the event, because what funders are looking for is that they don't want to be solely responsible for that event happening. They want to oftentimes seed fund or give money to something and then be able to say, you know, we funded you at this level for X amount of years. The funding's not there anymore, but we don't want your program to go away. They want to know that you are just as invested as they are in the program. So they're really looking at how you're raising money for the program, how you're thinking about going to the next step, sustainability of the program, how you're going to continue to provide this event or this service or this program or create community impact long after they're able to fund you. So I think that covers most of the basics there. So when you're thinking about where to really start with your application, I already mentioned the boilerplate narrative a little bit, but again, you really want to define the mission and the vision of your chapter ahead of time. So as a Barbershop Harmony Society chapter, you can certainly adopt parts of our strategic vision and our mission. That's absolutely going to be part of what you do. However, you as a chapter or you as a smaller entity or ensemble, you're obviously going to also have specific goals related to your community. So you have to be able to think about what is the impact that you want to have in your community through doing this program, through doing these events, through existing within your community that you can be able to talk to and speak to effectively. So yes, that's going to look something like our strategic mission and vision in the Barbershop Harmony Society. You're going to have elements of that, but we as an organization are able to do much more, right? Because we're this kind of head entity. So we are doing a lot more. You are very focused on your community. So you want to hone that mission and vision to be specific to your community and talk a little bit about the impact that you're having as an ensemble in your community. And then a community needs assessment is something that you probably wouldn't do on a grand scale. Again, this is going into measurement and evaluation a little bit, but it's a way to determine the impacts that your program could have. So even if that's not necessarily an assessment that you run, because assessments are very expensive, you can probably piggyback off of assessments that have already happened. So there's ways to look at the needs of the community that already exist. So if you're talking about budgetary gaps in funding for arts programming or for choral programs in schools, you can look at school budgets and show how that has decreased over time. Many of these things are public record. It's easy to get those records and look at that and show, you know, data shows this. I'm going to use Austin as an example because I know that's where Scott is. Data shows that choral programming in our local school system for X amount of schools has fallen by X% over the last 5 years. That's a much stronger case for funding and what you are bringing to the table as an external event than just saying it's common knowledge that school funding for choral programs is decreasing, right? Because you are showing that there's a specific need in your community that you are addressing through your programming. So the more often times that you can relate directly back to the community that you're serving and show that through data and make a valuable case for why you are doing that event or that program or whatever it is that you are trying to get funding for, that's going to be stronger to the reviewer, right? Many reviewers are going to be unfamiliar with barbershop. They're not going to have a background in arts programming sometimes. They're not going to have a deep understanding of all of the challenges that we face as arts organizations. They might have some idea, but they're not going to have the in-depth knowledge that we do as an arts organization. So it's a way to bring in the layman to your narrative that isn't just heartstrings. That's why data is important. Those heartstring moments in the way that you write your narrative are certainly also important, but you can't rely on it solely because it's not going to make a strong case to the funder as to why you should be the winner of those dollars. And then working backwards, I realize I'm working backwards up the bullet points, but following the guidelines. I know that it's seemingly the most obvious thing to say, but follow the directions. Every application is going to have a very specific set of directions, whether that's that they want the budget for the actual event compared to the actuals of the year before, compared to your organizational budget and a percentage of your organizational costs as it relates to that. All of these things, they are going to want very specific things as part of their RFP or their request for funding. Or if they don't have an RFP process, they will have some kind of funding guideline document that specifically tells you how they want their application done. And sometimes that's as granular as we want 460 words in Arial point font or Arial 12-point font in double spacing, and you cannot go over that. And it might sound silly, but they will decline you if you don't follow their very granular instructions. So as kind of silly as it is, we want to make sure that we follow every single instruction meticulously, follow all of those guidelines. A really great thing that I advise people to do is kind of break down any funding document into a checklist. So breaking down all of the requirements into some kind of Excel sheet or something like that, where you can actually go through and check off and make sure that you've hit the page requirements, that you've included every single attachment that they've asked for, that you've answered every single question to whatever extent they want, to make sure that you are following the font guidelines. So if you can break down everything that they put in that funding document into a kind of checklist for yourself, it's going to be much easier, because if you miss one thing just because a funding document happens to be really long, that doesn't really exempt you. As the Ferengi say in Star Trek, stupidity is not an excuse. Rule of acquisition number 62. I don't remember the actual rule of acquisition, but I got to throw something in there to make sure you're paying attention. So anyway, as we go on and we start planning our narrative, we've kind of written some of these things. We maybe got our checklist together. We have an idea specifically about what the event is that we want to get funded. This is also very important. You don't want to just see a funding opportunity and say, I think I can make something work. You want to have a plan for what the event is and then tweak as necessary if it's dependent on the funding, but you want to already have an idea of what the event or program is prior to actually going out and looking for funding. But as it pertains to the actual narrative part, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about each one of these items: your budget, your timeline, your objectives, and your outcomes. But these are the three biggest sections of your narrative. These are often the things that the reviewers look at the most. They are often the things that are the highest priority for the funder to make sure that you have followed all of the directions accordingly, that they make sense, that there is consistency throughout them. and they are often the highest scored sections of the actual narrative. So these are the big point bringers as it pertains to scoring your actual application. So when we think about our budget, often budgets don't speak for themselves. That's true, because they are numbers and line items and sheets. And sometimes, especially as we are adding up all the costs of a program, all of our expenses, all of our revenues, things can get lost when they are just a line item on a spreadsheet. And it might make sense to us, but it might not make sense to a reviewer. So that's where something like a budget narrative comes in handy. A budget narrative is a way that we can explain some of the costs that might get lost in translation to a funder. So a great example of this is I helped Small World Yoga submit a budget and a funding request to a grant called Bodecker Foundation, and they asked for funding to upgrade their Zoom account so they could continue to deliver yoga to communities through an upgraded Zoom account, so that they have the ability to have more participants, that they can record, that they have storage, all these things that go into having an upgraded Zoom account. However, it was just a line item on their budget that said upgraded Zoom account, $1,599. But there's no explanation as to why they would need that upgraded Zoom account. And so if you go through their narrative, you kind of can see, but there's no direct correlation to that line item. And if I'm from Bodecker and I'm reviewing that application, I'm like, well, they want $2,000 for what? I don't understand how they're using that or why it's important to what they're doing. So I advise them to take that specific line item and then break it down a little bit further. And you can do that as part of the actual budget sheet or as an extra attachment if the guidelines allow for extra attachments, or actually in the narrative itself if there's a budget section to write your narrative. So I would say, I said, you should really go back and explain how this upgraded Zoom account will help you further your mission and your ultimate goals for the rest of the application. So really explain that there. And then the budget narrative is also a good opportunity for you to break down costs that might have multiple calculations. So an example of this for youth programming I've seen a lot is people will say, we need $4,000 for travel expenses related to bringing this quartet to our event. Well, $4,000 is a lot of money. What are all of these expenses that are going into it? That calculation might include their housing. It might include mileage for one person over another person. It might include airfare. It might include fees and their quartet expenses. It might be the actual honorarium for the quartet. It could be a litany of different things. So all of those calculations don't fit into one calculation line item. That's something that you would want to put in a budget narrative, so the reviewer has a holistic view of what that actual line item cost entails. So it's much more than just one thing that you're paying for, right? And there is a way to make sure that you are calculating some of those travel expenses accurately. You don't want to just guess. So we're not in the game of estimation here. There are ways and resources that you can use to actually estimate costs effectively and correctly. So I don't think that I included it in this document, but I can do it in a follow-up of a website that the government uses to calculate mileage for federal grants and calculate airfare and travel expenses. It's awesome and it's free. So it's a much more effective way to estimate your costs than grabbing a number out of thin air and then in your budget narrative not being able to explain how you came to that cost, because that is just as ineffective as writing a random number, right? So when we look at our costs in general, our expenses here, we want to make sure that all of the costs that we've included as part of our budget are eligible. This is a very important thing. In the funding requirements, there will often be costs that are not eligible to be funded through a grant. This often includes things like capital expenses, which are one-time equipment purchases essentially, or one-off expenses sorry, there was a bug. One-off expenses that the funder is essentially paying for you to buy something. Sometimes that's not eligible as part of the funding request. So make sure that all of your costs are eligible. Sometimes they'll only allow a very specific percentage of operational costs. So you might be able to pay for part of your director's salary as part of your funding request. However, they might say we are only funding up to 20% of operational costs for any grant request. Here's how you can calculate it. So a lot of times in more stringent grant or funding programs, they will have a specific calculation that you have to use in order to get any operational costs funded. So just make sure that you follow their guidelines on how they want you to calculate it, not how you want to calculate it, but how they want you to calculate it. And then also you want to make sure to include both your revenues and your expenses. This is very important as it relates to both the program and the event, but also your operational costs as well. Just showing, again, the reviewer a holistic picture of what makes up all of your program or your event or the cost of your chapter. You want to include how you make money too. Again, this is where you would show that diversified funding and all of those different revenue streams that you have that lead to a much more holistic picture of what the actual event entails. Also, I would pay attention in general to whether or not the request or the funding document asks you to show a deficit in your budget. So if you are specifically asking for $7,000, you want to make sure that your budget shows that you need $7,000 in order to break even or have a modest cushion of $500 or whatever that number is for you all, or your budget padding. And everyone does budget pad a little bit, but only reasonably. It will be very apparent if you are budget padding significantly. However, you want to make sure that when you're showing your deficit, that deficit that you're showing matches what you're requesting in your narrative. I can't tell you how many times I've read a narrative that requests $7,000. I go to their budget and it shows that they only need $2,500 in their budget. Why would I give you $7,000 when your budget shows that you only need $2,500 to accomplish that event, right? The logic isn't there. So you want to make sure that there is consistency between your narrative and your budget. There should be consistency all throughout, but especially as it pertains to your attachments, because they're not explicitly within your narrative, it can sometimes get lost. So these are things that we need to check. However, if they say that you don't need to include a deficit as part of your budget request, you want to show that if there are any pending grants. So if you're applying for $7,000 and you're not showing an explicit deficit in your grant request, you would list them as a line item to say Bodecker Foundation $7,000 pending, right? So that way they can see how they factor into your budget balancing. I don't typically advise that as the best way because sometimes that will get lost. I think it's better to include a deficit and then under the deficit list the grant request explicitly so that they can see why you're asking for that amount of money in your narrative. I think it just reads better in general. So moving on from budgets, because I could talk about budgets all day long. This presentation that I'm giving you now is a conglomeration of a grant intensive class that I did over the course of 4 weeks. So we had 4 different segments where I talked and broke down each one of these sections into its own hour-long class. So there's a lot more about budgets and timelines and everything that we could go over, but I'm trying to give you the nitty-gritty, fast and furious here. So if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to address those. But the last thing about budgets that I want to mention is not to include large miscellaneous items. So if you have a miscellaneous line item that says $500, again, you want to include in your budget narrative what that miscellaneous entails, right? Because if I see a large amount requested for a miscellaneous line item, that seems very suspicious to me as a reviewer. What is that going toward? Is that paying for something that's not eligible? You really need to break down those miscellaneous costs. I see that quite frequently in budget requests. So just make sure that you're not doing that. So moving on from that, Timelines, again, this is a great way to kind of serve as a checklist for your program. I mentioned I'm a big fan of lists. So I've already mentioned kind of breaking down a funding request into an actual checklist. So you can say, yes, I've met this requirement. Yes, we're here. But with the timeline specifically, this is a great checklist for your actual program or your event to make sure that you are succeeding. It's a way to identify your milestones. It's a way to make sure that everything is happening on time and effectively. It's a way to show the funder that you've already thoroughly thought about how you're going to measure your success. What are the milestone events? We will know that we have accomplished X when we get here. That's why a timeline is very important. You want to make sure that everything that is on your timeline is assigned to a person or a party. It is sometimes okay to assign it to a group of people. So if you say the event committee is going to do X, however, I don't normally suggest doing that, because if you assign everything to the same committee, that really tells me nothing as a reviewer looking at a document. There might be two committees, but the two committees are doing everything, and who are on these committees? Is it the same people? Again, that doesn't really make sense. So assign it to a person. You don't want to include the person's name because the reviewers are likely going to be unfamiliar with who that person is, but I would list their title. So the VP of music does X. The board does X. The chapter president does X, right? Like you can include their titles as part of the assignment, and that is a much more effective way for the reviewer to understand and get a, again, holistic picture of who's taking care of what when. It just makes sure that you have really gotten all of your ducks in a row and leads the reviewer to have confidence that this review or this event or program will take place and that it will be run effectively. Because ultimately what they are looking for is to make sure, and this is the crux of what grant applications are for, is to make sure that you are being a good steward of their funds. And by giving them a thorough timeline, giving them a good application, giving them a well thought out budget, giving them examples of how you're going to show your success, that's what makes them confident in giving you that money to make sure that you're running a program or an event that is quality and that is going to provide critical care or needs or fulfill critical needs in the community. So that's why applications are important. I can't tell you how many wonderful events and programs are out there, but they don't get funded because they don't write a good application, or they miss a lot of these small things and they don't get funded, and they wonder why, because they have such an awesome program. But how would a third-party objective person know that that program is great by reading that? They wouldn't. So that's why it's important. So in your timeline as well, you just want to make sure that you include both pre-event or program happenings as well as post-event happenings that are related to the event. So oftentimes I see this kind of big thing that they've thought about everything that needs to happen leading up to the day and everything that's on the day, but then they forget that component of, well, we've got to submit our reports, we have to analyze any surveys we've done, we have to close out our costs and our final budgets. All of these kind of post-event things are just as important as your pre-event happenings. And you want to make sure that you have all the planning on there as well. So that's your pre-event, not just what's happening on that day at what times. That is something that is pretty specific to youth events and youth programs that I've seen. So with our objectives and our outcomes, specifically what our objectives are, is they are the steps to make our goals happen. So if we're thinking about our mission and vision and those kinds of things, your mission is what you're put on this earth to do. Your vision is the world that you want to see as a result of your mission of work. And then your objectives are kind of your overarching goals for this program or project. But the objectives are the steps that you're going to take to get there. So when we think about our objectives, we want to make sure they're SMART. And not just smart in intelligence, but this, as you might assume, is an acronym because it's on all capitals. So S stands for specific. We want to make sure that our objectives are detailed and relatable and relevant directly to the event. You want to make sure that they are actionable aspects of your actual program. And then M stands for measurable, which is part of measurement and evaluation. You want to make sure that you can show how you're going to be successful and how you're going to measure your success. A stands for achievable. And yes, it's okay to dream big, but you want to make sure that what you're doing, you can actually accomplish. So if you are running a first-year youth program, it might be really awesome to say, we're going to have 2,000 kids our first year, but I don't know that that's necessarily achievable. A really achievable but auspicious goal might be 200 kids, right? So we can dream big, but we don't want to dream so big that when we report, we look like we have failed. So it's better to under promise and over deliver in this sense always. But we also want to be realistic and say, if we were going to do this and make it successful, how successful can we make it? And so it's important to dream, but it's important to make sure that those dreams are achievable. R is relevant. So we want to make sure that everything that we include as part of our objectives relates specifically back to the program. We don't want to include irrelevant information as part of your objectives. So if you're running a youth event, you don't want to include information about how you're going to have people at your Christmas show as part of your objectives, right? That doesn't make sense because this is about your youth event. And so you want to make sure that everything you include as part of your objectives relate directly to that youth event or program. And then the T there stands for time bound. You want to make sure that it has a clear beginning and end point. That is good project management. That is good program management. You want to make sure that even your operational things that you have as part of what you do every year have a specific beginning and end time. So we don't do singing Valentines during the whole course of the year, usually. Some people probably do. But, you know, we do it from the end of January to the first week of March, and that's your pre and post, and you do it all throughout February or whatever it is. You just want to make sure that you have a specific time goal to what that program is. Now, if you're applying for operational funding, that's going to be a little bit different, but they will say, you know, you can only use these funds over X amount of years. And so you have to show how you would use all those funds that you're requesting within that time period. So it's still time bound in that way. For your outcomes, this is a section that I could talk about all day because measurement and evaluation is so extensive and you can really get into the nitty gritty here. But essentially from a very high level, this is how you measure your program, and you want to make sure that you include both quantitative and qualitative outcomes. Quantitative here relating specifically to numbers. This might be a percentage of people came to this event, or this might be the number of attendees or participants you had. This might be the number of schools you served. This might be the amount of people that donated to your program as a result of your marketing efforts. These are all quantitative outcomes because they are measurable by a specific number. Your qualitative outcomes are related to the feelings that people have as a result of your program, your efforts, your community impact. So you might measure things like the confidence of a kid that's in your youth program, or how well they understood Barbershop, or how connected they feel to their other students after singing in a quartet, or the feeling of happiness as it relates to their program. So that might be things like your net promoter score, your NPS score. Your NPS score is that thing that you see on every single survey that says, how likely are you to recommend this event, from very likely to very unlikely on a 10-point score. That is your net promoter score. The way net promoter scores are calculated is very complicated in my personal opinion, but they are important to understanding how effective your programming is. And the great thing about having a Net Promoter Score is that it is comparable to other organizations and other events, because almost everyone uses this kind of universal scoring system. So if you have more questions about measurement and evaluation specifically, you can email impact@barbershop.org, or there's actually a place on the Document Center that has a lot of these measurement and evaluation resources available for you. There are some videos about some measurement and evaluation basics that I won't get into on here, but it's there's also a bank of survey questions that we hired an outside evaluator to write that deal specifically with some of these qualitative outcomes. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can literally use questions that we already are using as an organization that would probably apply to your program. And then that way you can compare even to what other chapters are doing or what the BHS is doing. So that's a really great resource for you all. And I'll include in my follow-up email some of these resources that I've mentioned, just so you have them written down somewhere. And then beyond the actual basics before we get into a little bit of grant seeking, which I know is everybody's favorite topic because nobody likes talking about writing the application. They just want to get the money, right? But beyond the actual basics of writing the application, we want to avoid jargon. So as barbershoppers, we love our acronyms, don't we? We love everything we have ASO, we have BHS, we have district LOL and SWD and all of these different things that stand, like I've been in barbershop 5 years and I'm still learning acronyms. I will never know all of the acronyms. And I would say that of most people, I've got a lot of them down pat, but oh my gosh, when I first was hired, they literally gave me a definition sheet with all the acronyms. So I know that we love to use them. However, we want to avoid using those in our applications because these people that are reviewing your application are usually not barbershoppers. They're usually not even musicians sometimes. So if we can break down what a tag is for somebody to understand how tag singing is related to what we do, or even breaking down what makes a quartet or what makes Barbershop Harmony special. Or, we don't want to include a bunch of musical theory as part of our applications because we might be alienating a reviewer that doesn't have a background in musical theory. We don't want to include a lot of acronyms that are related specifically to barbershop because we don't want to alienate people that are not barbershoppers. So if we do use acronyms, it's important to explain what those acronyms mean. So if I was going to write, for example, to use Small World Yoga as an example instead of BHS constantly, they acronym or I guess it's not an acronym because you don't say it out loud, but their abbreviation is SWY. And so I went through and made sure that they were saying Small World Yoga and then in parentheses SWY. So that just explains what that abbreviation or acronym means before you use it throughout your narrative. If it's a particularly long application, I would actually recommend using the acronym or the abbreviation and explaining it more than one time. Because if you're reading a particularly long application, sometimes people take breaks in between, or you get to the 6th page of an application and you've forgotten what also means, right? So if you rewrite it another time later in the application, that would behoove you just for clarity sometimes. You don't have to do it every single time, but more than once if it's a particularly long application is a good rule of thumb. Using positive language. So we want to make sure that we are saying things in a positive light. It is a small cognitive switch that people have when they're reading that can make them feel better about what they're reading. So these could be things like saying that something is cost effective versus cheap, right? That's an example of positive language, or that something is an investment versus a cost or expense. So things like that is just a small cognitive way that you can change your language to make sure that it is perceived by the reviewer in a positive light. Proofreading. I don't know what more to say about that, but a lot of times Grammarly is a great add-on extension to Google Chrome that I use all the time because I am one of the biggest comma splicers in the world. So Grammarly is a great tool, but I would also have multiple people read your application if you can bribe them to do so. My general rule of thumb is have 3 people review your application. One person who is very involved in what you're doing and can make sure you're getting the facts right. Another person who might have some idea that you're a barbershopper, that you're doing some kind of youth event, but not have like a clear idea of what it is, so you can get kind of the layman perspective. And then somebody who loves to tell you you're wrong. The third person is one of the most important people for me. My brother was a copywriter for several years, and he went to journalism school. He wrote for a newspaper in Kansas. And so I know that he wants to mark everything up with a red marker. And if you can find somebody in your life that loves to do that for you, take it, because it's not about being right, it's about getting it right. And those people are very important to getting it right. So don't be so glued and attached to your narrative that you're not willing to see how something could be rewritten in a more clear, concise, and understandable way. I'm also saying this so I remember it myself. I have to tell myself all the time, be less defensive. You don't know everything as it pertains to writing. And then here again, I've just written it for good measure, but make sure you're consistent. You're consistent in your timelines of when it's going to happen. You're consistent in your budget requests and what you've requested and how you're requesting it and the things that you are asking for as part of your grant. And then make sure your narrative's consistent so you're not contradicting yourself in other parts of your narrative. And then using a narrative format. Bullet points are okay and in certain instances for clarity, but you want to make sure that you're writing in beautiful English, grammatically correct English, full sentences, not fragments, general rule, get all your verbiage correct, make sure that all those things line up. You don't want a poorly written narrative be the reason that you're declined, right? And then be concise but thorough. So there are going to be word limit caps sometimes. If there aren't word limits or character limits for any particular sections, don't be so verbose that your meaning gets lost. Again, I have to tell myself this because my language can get a little flowery, but my friend who is a doctoral candidate, actually, you all may know him, Steve Scott, he said, terser is worser, and by worser, I mean better. Because if you can, I don't know what that meant exactly, but what I took from it is that I should write more clearly, and if we can shorten some of those very long sentences to be more concise, that is better for the reviewer, because you don't want your verbose language to lose the meaning of what you're trying to convey. So grant thinking. And I realize that we're kind of coming up on the end of our time, or what I've allotted as our time. So I'm going to run through this quite quickly. And if you have any specific questions, I can answer those during the Q&A. But this is everybody's favorite topic, is where to start looking for the money. So the first thing I want to talk about are these two things, corporate dollars and foundation dollars, because I want to spend the majority of our time talking about public funding. So corporate dollars are a great way to look for in-kind donations. These are local businesses or headquartered corporations that are within your city limits or your region that already have giving programs kind of incorporated within them. Not to use a pun there, but the Chamber of Commerce is a great place to get an idea of who would probably be willing to sponsor the same kind of programs that you're doing, because these people already have to pay a certain amount of money to be part of the Chamber of Commerce. They've shown community commitment by being in the Chamber of Commerce. So that's a great list of businesses and organizations to approach. Also, this is kind of a sneaky tactic, but if you go to another arts program or show in your city, and then you take their billet or their program, and then on the back of that, it has all their sponsorships and people that have donated to their program, and you can go to them and say, hey, I attended this great event that you helped support. I'm actually doing something that's similar, and here's what we're gonna do. Would you be interested in supporting the arts like you supported da-da-da? That's a great way to get some ideas of other people or other businesses to approach. And again, headquarter locations are great because they often support other community organizations. There's no reason that you can't be one of them. But a lot of times it is a personal relationship or connection. So as often as you can, networking with people or networking in your own groups of friends and seeing, where people work and what their kind of giving programs are, or if there's a connection there that you can build. Personal relationships are really important as it pertains to corporate dollars, because oftentimes it's just hard to get in the door. So that is what I would say is the biggest factor to these, and that's why I don't think that they're the easiest to get into. But once you do, if you build that relationship, if you foster that relationship, it can be a good source of income year over year because they tend to latch on to things. And then foundation dollars, the community foundation is a good place to start looking. Sometimes as barbershop entities, we're not always qualified to apply for discretionary funds through the community foundation because you have to make a certain level of revenue as an organization, or you have to have been around for a certain amount of time or have certain community impacts. So there's a lot more requirements there, but some of our larger chapters might be able to do something like that. Essentially what a community foundation is a way for individual private people to give money to a cause, and then the community foundation funds or gives out or re-grants that money to the people doing and meeting those needs of the cause that people are giving to. So an example of that in Nashville is when the tornado happened in March, our community foundation raised millions of dollars from private citizens to help specifically with tornado impacts. So they gave to organizations that were doing cleanup, or organizations helping people refinance and rebuild their homes, things like that. Local and regional foundations, again, these can be more competitive, and you oftentimes need more collaboration. So these are the ones that you're going to really need other organizations to help give you a leg up to get that funding. So that's creating more collective impact. So that makes you a more competitive application for these. And again, it's all about relationship building. Do you know the program officer? Do you know somebody in the system? Do you know a former reviewer? And sometimes you can actually reach out to those people and say, like, can you get me in touch with a former reviewer, or can you tell me who is on the review board? Or sometimes you can get that, but it's not as simple. It's a lot of relationship building there. And then national foundations, I won't even bother talking much about these because these are the most competitive and they are very difficult to get. And they're often looking to fund huge national programs, right? That not necessarily our community focused funding, which is oftentimes what we're eligible for as barbershop chapters and entities. But a great place to look for funding is from your local arts board or your arts commission. And this is not always available to our really, really rural places, but for the most part, there are a lot of regional arts boards, art commissions that are, if they're not at the local level, which are probably the most attainable, are at the state level, which you can still get. And especially in a rural area, you can make a great case to a state arts board that you are serving a population that they don't often meet. So there are still ways to get funding from a state arts commission. But the great thing about the public funding in general is that it is so transparent. Because it deals with public dollars, they have a lot of things that are in place to make sure that they're doing things in a transparent way to create equity, but also to create accountability for how they're being stewards of public dollars. And these, when I say public dollars, that means tax dollars. So how they're spending the public's money. So that's why it is so transparent. essentially they will give you every piece of criteria you need. They'll tell you exactly how they're going to score it. They'll tell you who is on the review board. They often adjudicate the actual grant publicly, so you can actually go and hear or tune in to hear your application being discussed, which is a wonderful learning opportunity to make your application better. It is incredibly boring. I will tell you that up front, but it can make, and it's really hard too, because you're not allowed to respond to anything that they say, obviously, so it can make you cringe a little, but it can also make your application the next year even better, because you have a better idea of what they're looking for and how to craft the narrative, or what questions they had when reading your application that you can help clarify in your next application. I would actually even suggest that before you apply, in the year before, if you have that kind of forethought, to actually listen to some of the grants be adjudicated that are not your own, so you can hear just the way that reviewers think and what kinds of questions are arising most often, so you can try to answer those and get ahead of the game. But oftentimes the review board does change year over year, so it won't always be the exact same reviewers, but you can also kind of get a good idea of what they're looking for in general, and how they are reading the questions as much as they are answering, or they're reading the answers to the questions. So again, you kind of go through a qualification process, and then if you qualify, so you've said, I want to submit for this, and I've met all of the basic requirements that you have about our operational expenses and all of the kind of tax things that you have to meet. Then it goes to application. You fill out an application, you turn in that application. Then it goes to a staff review, which is somebody like me who is a program officer, looks at your application, makes sure that you met all of the criteria, the requirements, the attachments, just basically looking for logistically that you've checked all the boxes. And then if you meet those criteria, it goes to a panel review, which is then adjudicated out loud, as I mentioned. And then if the review panel reviews your actual application, it goes to a funding recommendation, which they either say, we want to give them X amount of dollars, and oftentimes they'll come in under what you've requested. That's not anything to do with your application. Oftentimes it's just, well, we've never funded them before, so let's give them a smaller amount and see how they do. And then if they come back and give us, the kind of reporting that we want, and they were able to be effective, then we'll give them a larger sum next time. And I just want to say this in general with grants: don't be discouraged if you're declined. You are going to be declined much more often than you are going to be accepted. It's kind of the nature of the game. I'm not saying that isn't defeating, like it will give you a defeatist feeling sometimes. It does hurt to have somebody tell us that our application isn't good enough, or that we didn't write it well enough, but we have to kind of park our ego, take their criticism, come back with a better application next time, use what we can from it, have it be a learning experience, and also understand sometimes that there might be instances that have nothing to do with our application. It might be that they had a smaller funding pool this year. It might be that they had just the best applications they've ever seen, and they could only give a small portion of what they wanted to give. And so coming back and the next year and showing that you've improved, and that you're still doing the thing that you want to do, and that you're still making an impact, is just as important as submitting that first application. So being consistent and learning from your mistakes and growing. I think that we can all relate to that as part of music too, right? Like, we weren't the best singer when we showed up to our very first rehearsal, and so we probably got critiqued, and sometimes people aren't always they don't give feedback in the way we want to receive it sometimes, but it's still an investment in your growth, and now you are a better singer because of it. Unless you're me, at which point you've always remained the same kind of singer, which is poor. And so then it goes to approval, which then kind of implies that you have to have a contract with the state to say, this is how we will spend this money. This is what we will do with it. You sign that contract, which is committing you to it. Then you go to execution. You're actually doing the program or project, or you're within the funding year, you're using that money. And then it goes to monitoring and reporting. So sometimes you might be chosen at random to be monitored, which is essentially somebody shows up, you have to give them documentation of certain things, and you have to do it within a certain amount of time in order to fulfill their requirements. So it's always good to look at what the monitoring requirements are and make sure that you have all of those things prepared just in case you are monitored, because you don't want to say, oh, well, it won't be me, and then it ends up being you. And then with reporting, I think that that's a good place to start as you're looking at whether or not you're eligible, but also can you pull it off? Sometimes they'll ask for really strict things in their reporting requirements that you might not be able to fulfill. So look at the reporting requirements, make sure that you can fulfill everything that they want you to report on. And then that's a great starting point too, as you're looking at and thinking about your own measurement and evaluation, that you can kind of be collecting that data along the way. So you don't get to the end, go to report and see that, oh gosh, I didn't even ask that as part of our survey, or I don't have that data. How am I going to go back and backtrack that data? You might submit an incomplete report, which makes you not really a great candidate for future funding. So look at the reporting requirements ahead of time. And then rinse, repeat. And that's essentially, that's what a public funding process is like. It takes a long time. You can see that it's quite a long process. So with public funding in particular, it's not an application that you're going to submit and hear back next month. It's oftentimes you're going to submit this a year in advance for what you want to do, or 6 months at least in advance. So when you're planning the actual program or project, you want to keep that in mind and just make sure that you're planning far out in advance of what you want to do, so that it gives you time to prepare all these things, and that you're not shocked when you learn how long it's going to take to know if you got the funding to do it. And also, especially if we're doing youth programming, schools and music educators often build out their calendars a year in advance. So if we're building relationships with music educators specifically, we want to make sure that we give them enough time to say, yeah, I'm going to come to your program a year from now, right? And just that gives us some time to work it into their calendars. So that's a great thing to remember as part of your relationship building. So these are just some of the resources that we have here. Our grants program is currently paused just due to COVID realities. So we're not actually accepting applications at this moment in time. However, the application summaries are still on there, which is a great way to just kind of look at what projects we funded previously and kind of see if there are other people doing similar things to you in the same area. So that's like a good starting point. Or if you have questions on how to build or start a program, their emails are on there. So you can email those folks and say, hey, I saw that you wrote this project description for this event in whatever year. How did that go? What was it like? Do you have any advice for me as I'm starting to do this program? That's just a good contact point. And then we do also have our review criteria and our application questions on there, just so you can look at some questions that a funder might ask. It might give you a good reference point of how to start crafting your boilerplate narrative. So it's just a kind of resource for questions. And then these are just some resources. So National Association of State Arts Agencies, that's where you can look up where, like what the agency is for your state that has your arts commission. But a simple Google search will also help. Grant writing and funding, that's a podcast. I know everybody learns differently. If you like listening to my voice, maybe you'll like listening to this woman's voice. But she goes over a ton of different topics of grant writing. So if you get stuck on anything, you could go and see if there's an episode about it and listen, give that a listen. She also has some books. There's tons of grant writing books. And then Grant Forward and GuideStar are, well, GuideStar is just a website that you can see what funders are out there and also what organizations are out there, and they list a bunch of information. Grant Forward actually costs money. It's a subscription base, but what they don't tell you is that the search is free. So you can go on to Grant Forward and actually search your area or your region, or like specific keywords like arts or arts agency or singing or a cappella or whatever it is, and see, it'll pull up a bunch of different search results of funders that are looking to fund that specific thing. You can't click on the funders, but they've done half the work for you. They found the grant, so you can just reverse engineer it and then go take that name of that foundation or that grant and then Google it and then go through directly through the funder. So that's a sneaky way around their pay method. But anyway, I think that's pretty much all I have for you all today. Again, I could talk to a lot of these things for a pretty long time, so I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you might have as you went throughout my presentation.
So a couple things, Ashley, real quick. One, you mentioned this presentation was pared down from a larger presentation where things were broken down into like 1 hour segments. Are the links for those available, or how would we get going a little bit deeper and find your presentation?
Yeah, so that particular presentation for the grant intensive was something that I did through education.barbershop.org. So that, I'm not sure if it lives on there because it was a pretty interactive class. So I can't remember if we decided to keep the actual content on there or not. I think that was just, it might be something that I teach again in the future online, but I don't think that the actual content lives anywhere right now that you could review it.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
So another question came up online, and that is when going back to applications, I've been previously told to use active versus passive voice.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yes, always use active versus passive voice. This is a debate actually that I had yesterday with my friend in San Diego. I know we talk about thrilling things, active versus passive voice. We also debated what if we had to eat 12 eggs, what form would we eat the eggs? So, I mean, we're really talking about the most important things here. But he and I were talking about active and passive voice, and sometimes it's okay to have some passive voice, I think, in like when you're writing a novel, and there are just some times that you can't get around it. But in a grant application, you're really thinking of a grant application as a persuasive essay. It's most important to include active voice as often as possible. There's really no way around using passive voice in a sentence. It's probably okay, but you definitely want to be active in your voicing as often as possible. So an example of active versus passive voice, just for the good of the order, an example of passive voice would be the mission of the Barbershop Harmony Society is to bring people together in fellowship and harmony through the power of singing, which I don't think is the exact verbiage of our mission. I'm sorry, but it is very close. But active voice would be the Barbershop Harmony Society fulfills its mission of bringing people together through harmony and fellowship by X. So that's an example of active versus passive voice. So a great way to just check and see if your sentence is passive or active is if you're using the verb is or are or those kind of like smaller verbs. And you know, I'm not a grammarian, so I'm trying to think if it's the direct object, or I'm sure there's better explanations online of it, but that's how I always judge my active versus passive voice as I'm just kind of skimming and going throughout.
Okay, that's helpful. And we'll be sure to let Joe know that you couldn't recite the mission of the Barbershop Harmony Society.
No, I know that I'm very, very close.
One more question real quick. You mentioned that there were some resources. You had alluded to a government website link earlier. Are those things that you can send me and I'll include into the comments on the recording? Very good. I've got everyone muted, but if anyone has a final question, Jack, I saw that you unmuted. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I had a couple. Obviously, we're part of Barbershop Harmony Society, but in a lot of these collaborative efforts, there's the opportunity to work with non-barbershoppers with particularly some outreach to the African American community and gospel singing. So can we kind of I don't want to use the word fudge. Okay, I'll use the word fudge. And de-emphasize the barbershop aspect in a grant without running afoul of the bodies that be in Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, again, barbershop is part of what, yeah, it is part of what we do. And being inclusive of other people and creating learning and teaching moments, as I was saying, is just as important. To bring people into our community, we also have to be interested in what's important to them and their communities. And I think that relationship building is part of that. And, you know, having barbershop as an aspect of something and then having that event be much bigger than that, that is totally acceptable, because you're bringing barbershop, right? You are bringing barbershop, you're bringing the culture of barbershop, you're being ambassadors for barbershop by doing that. But the event doesn't have to be all about you always. Okay. I think that's wonderful.
Okay, I'm new to the VM board, so I have another dumb question. Sponsorships. If we go to Cardig or ABC and get them to pony up $50,000 to help us put on a show, is it okay to have a banner?
Yeah.
On the stage?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
because it has, you know, I've worked with other charitable organizations and we're very, very leery about looking like we're sponsoring or endorsing somebody when we do something like that.
Right. And I mean, it is, I mean, I guess it is dependent about how you brand it and what the organization is. Like, we probably wouldn't want to be sponsored by an organization whose mission it is, or a business that like wants to burn sheet music, right? But or like that maybe has really like horrible core values as a business.
Sure.
But but I think in general, like if you're selling sponsorships and you include their logo on a shirt or on the back of a program or in a program, like all of these things have certainly been done, and I don't see any
Just it kind of raises new questions when you go to perform on the internet too.
Yeah.
But I just would make the physical analogy. If we could do a banner on the stage, then we can certainly do a banner across an internet broadcast as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. You sound like you have more answers than me. But our marketing team is a great resource too, to reach out to them and make sure that you know, we're using our logo and our branding in a way that represents the brand of Barbershop Harmony. You know, we don't want to like put the Barbershop Harmony Society brand over, like, I don't know, demonic seances or something.
In our case, we wouldn't do liquor or cigarettes.
Right. Maybe not. But I also know like a quartet who their name is High Gravity, and they do like a beer thing. So I don't know. I guess it's also about the brand of your ensemble and who you are and how you want to represent yourself to the community as well.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was an outstanding presentation. Thank you. I know you jammed a lot into an hour.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes I talk really fast, so I have to tell myself, slow down. Don't be, because I can talk a mile a minute.
I had a friend in high school who was blind, and they had those learning records, and they were typically on 33 1/3 vinyl, and he played them on 45 just so he could listen, because he can listen faster than you can talk.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Well, in the interest of time, I know we're a little bit over here. Did anybody have any additional questions for Ashley before we let her go? All right, so just for the...
Oh, I think maybe Mary has something.
I was just going to say thank you, Ashley. I listened to your class this summer during the VHU.
Oh, awesome.
And it didn't all sink in. And I can't find my notes, but I wrote them all down, did the screenshots, so we're going to work on it some more. Right now, I've done a couple small grants years ago with a chorus, and I got 3 out of 3, and I've stopped because I'm afraid of going.
Yeah, and this is something too, like, I'm not always available to read entire applications because I think that would just get very overwhelming to me as how much work I can take on. But if there are specific sections of narrative or something that you want to send to me that I can maybe help with, you're always welcome to do that. And if I'm not able to get to it right away, I will definitely, I'm pretty responsive as it pertains to my email and everything. So I'm pretty on it in terms of that. So, and also Scott, if you are willing, can I make a little plug for things that are happening this weekend for BHS?
No, not at all.
Okay. Well, as Mary, did I cut you off? Did you finish what you had to say? Okay. For this, you know, the other aspect of my job is inclusion and doing inclusion projects. And so we've got some really exciting things going on. So on Sunday, so tomorrow evening, we have a panel of wonderful people to talk about LGBTQ plus and gender identity. Sorry, I'm talking too fast. LGBTQ plus and gender identity and the trans identity to talk about that experience within Barbershop and how to become better allies to that community. And then on the 21st, we have a panel about the history of repertoire and the background of music and how to choose non-problematic music, which I know is something that's very pertinent to our times today, and how what we sing matters and how it represents us to audiences. So that's going to be awesome. It's going to be moderated by Kevin Keller. There's some fabulous people on that panel. That's on the 21st. And then on the 28th, Joe Cerruti and Devin Bradford are going to be talking about reaching out to new communities and building trust and rapport with new audiences in the community. And that's going to be awesome as well. And then we'll have some November events coming up after that as well. So keep an eye out for those. And then just as an inclusion update, we've been working on a project for a submission process for our music catalog to kind of follow up to that repertoire and music piece there, so people will be able to identify problematic music within our repertoire, and it'll be reviewed by a review panel, and there'll be transparent criteria for all of that too. So be on the lookout for that project as well. So that's like inclusion stuff that I just wanted to mention to you that I'm excited about and I wanted to share. But if you have any questions about those, you can reach me through outreach@barbershop.org or inclusion@barbershop.org. Both of those are emails for me, and I'll send a follow-up to Scott. Would you hate me if I did that on Monday? So
not at all. That's just
okay.
fine. What I'll do is
just
for everyone who's made it, and for those that haven't been able to and watch this later, well, you won't know until I send it, but I'm going to be posting the recording of this to our YouTube channel, and then I will send out the links via the same email addresses that I sent the invitation. And that should be posted sometime this weekend. And then once I get the information from Ashley, I'll go on ahead and link that in the comments section of YouTube. So Ashley, it's been a great presentation. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time. Thanks everyone, and have a happy Saturday.
Bye.
Bye everybody.
Bye.